So a couple of months ago, I made a video on Jordan Peterson talking about how he blamed women for sexual harassment. So the video only got 79 likes and thousands of dislikes, and all his fans sort of like bombarded the comments saying I didn't understand what he was saying, I'm too stupid, I'm not an intellectual, I can't really grasp these concepts that women are to blame for sexual harassment. Now I'll point to two things I said in the video which have become really evident in the wake of a batshit New York Times article which he gives the craziest quotes, and he blames women even more for so much stuff. And in this video, what I'm going to be discussing is how someone like him has become okay and how he's become prominent. And I'm also going to discuss how he promotes the idea that women owe men something. I call it the nice guys mentality. If a woman rejects you, she's being a bitch, even if you're nice to her. You've probably all seen this on places like Reddit and Facebook. Some creepy guy trying to be nice, and when a woman rejects him, he's like, fuck you, bitch, hope you die, all this shit. You know what I'm talking about. So let's get into what I said in the last video. For someone like him to say that, it makes me think he's had experience in the past where a woman he's made a woman feel seriously uncomfortable because he didn't know what the rules are. These are the rules. If you're not a fucking piece of shit, if you're not like a misogynistic idiot, or just like there's something wrong with your brain, that's how you treat women in the workplace. It's implied in what he's saying, and people were saying he's trolling, all this shit. No, he's not. He's deadly serious. He says women are hypocritical for wearing makeup and high heels in the workplace because it makes them more sexually attractive. And that is such an insane argument. So people who think he's smart, people who look up to him, take a look at the way he thinks of women and men. Men are animals, can't help themselves. You know, women, it's your fault. You know, our natural instinct is to try and have sex with you because you look good. And it's just crazy. You know, in the world we live in today, why are people like this coming to the top of like academia? So I pointed out how Jordan Peterson probably has a history of being rejected by women. I think this has kind of shaped his worldview. I don't think he's either done something in the past which he's been heavily rejected for and he feels like he's in the right, or he's just been unlucky with women all his lives until this point where he's become, you know, really, really famous for being, you know, in my opinion, a fucking idiot. What people like Peterson, Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, Paul Joseph Watson do is tell you, or tell people who have a negative mindset about equality, gender rights, race relations, everything, they tell you it's okay to feel that way because of some stupid pseudoscience or cherry-picking historical facts. They make bigots and racists feel like it's okay to be who they are, and anyone trying to, you know, undermine them really has an agenda. So for Jordan Peterson, the SJWs, the homosexuals, the leftists, they're all actually Marxists, which have infiltrated everywhere, and they're trying to impose cultural Marxism where there's no really freedom of speech or freedom of thought. We all have to combine and believe in one thing, which is obviously insane. But if you don't think Jordan Peterson is unhinged, I'm going to get into an article that the New York Times just wrote on him where a woman spent a couple of days with him, and I'm going to show you what he is and who he appeals to. And the reason I call him an incel intellectual is because the recent incel terrorist attack, he essentially blames on women. So an article by Nellie Bowles in the New York Times says, Jordan Peterson, custodian of the patriarchy, he says there's a crisis in masculinity. Why won't women, all these wives and witches, just behave? And this article is insane. Like, I'm telling you, I read it 3 times and I thought, this must be satire, this isn't real. I can't believe, you know, this is the man people are going crazy about. You know, the man I said blames women for sexual harassment, the man I called earlier, you know, has an insane worldview of men and women. To start with, he told Nellie, the masculine spirit is under assault. It's obvious. And she goes on to say, in Mr. Peterson's world, order is masculine, chaos is feminine. And if an overdose of femininity is our new position, Mr. Peterson knows the cure. Hence his new book's subtitle, An Antidote to Chaos. He says, we have to rediscover the internal values and live them out. So let's get into the incel part straight away, because, you know, my video is titled The Incel Intellectual. So recently, a young man named Alec Minassian drove through Toronto trying to kill people with his van. 10 were killed, and he's been charged with first-degree murder for their deaths, and with attempted murder for 16 people who were injured. Mr. Minassian declared himself to be part of a misogynist group whose members call themselves incels. The term is short for involuntary celibates. Though the group has evolved into a male supremacist movement made up of people, some celibate, some not, who believe that women should be treated as sexual objects with few rights. Some believe in forced sexual redistribution, in which a governing body would intervene in a woman's lives to force them into sexual relationships. Sounds like The Handmaid's Tale. Here we get into Peterson's view. Violent attacks are what happens when men do not have partners, Mr. Peterson says, and society needs to work to make sure those men are married. He was angry at God because women were rejecting him, Mr. Peterson says of the Toronto killer. The cure for that is enforced monogamy. That's actually why monogamy emerges. Mrs. Peterson does not pause when he says this. Enforced monogamy is, to him, simply a rational solution. Otherwise, women will only go for the most high-status men, he explains. And that couldn't make either gender happy in the end. Half of the men fail, he says, meaning they don't procreate. and no one cares about the men who fail. The author says, I laugh because it is absurd. Jordan Peterson says, you're laughing about them, he says. Give me a disappointed look. That's because you're female. So isn't that insane, right? So men who are pathetic and believe women owe them something, right? It's women's fault because you're laughing at them, and because there's no enforced monogamy, all women only go for, I guess, the top 1% of elite males. You know, if you're not a prom king or a high school athlete, no one's gonna like you. Think about your own life, right? Think about every guy who's married or every guy has a girlfriend. Can you honestly tell me most of them are like the top of masculinity? Do they have athletic bodies? Are they insanely smart? Are they, you know, great in social situations? Think about everyone, you know, even your parents. Is that true? Half of the men fail and it's women's fault because you're laughing at them. That's why we should have enforced monogamy. Or the people eventually pair up later, or you go with someone because you like their personality, you get on really well. It's not all about looks and like social hierarchies. But what Jordan Peterson does to the incels, he tells them it's okay you feel like that. Society has rejected you. It's society's fault. The females are laughing at you. You're not pathetic. It's not your own fault. See, it's a nice guy mentality. Nice guys feel they're owed something. If I just treat women a bit okay and they don't give me sex, then it's their fault. Because the Chads and the Stacys, you know, they look down on people like me. So for someone who preaches about, you know, really accountability, and then he's talking about how it's not really these people's fault. You know, he was angry at God. Another reason why I think his whole intellectual stuff is bullshit. A really right-wing religious guy who says atheism is bad and everything is talking about all this shit. He was angry at God, so he had to kill women and kill just random people because there's no enforced monogamy. Does anyone not realise how batshit that sounds? And that's why I think he has traits of an actual incel. And I said in my last video that I think he's had a really negative experience with women, which has made him so bitter and trying to understand them. Attack on masculinity. You know, does anyone say to like Usain Bolt or, you know, some of the greatest soccer players or American football players, oh, tone it down, you can't be masculine anymore? Our whole world is dominated by masculinity. And this is the problem with people like Peterson and groups like white supremacists and everything. Because their power has been taken away a tiny little bit, they think it's a crisis, right? So because women are becoming leaders, because Hillary Clinton could have been president, because Angela Merkel is the chancellor, because Theresa May is the prime minister, that's taken away from men's power. But they're still dominating across the globe. Men dominate everything. But because they've been taking the power away a little bit, it's a crisis. It's the same in America you see with Christian conservatives, white supremacists, Confederates. Because black people are speaking up about the statues, taking them down, or because, you know, you see a lot of Trump supporters, because people who are transgender, gay, from minorities are getting more rights, their white dominance isn't as powerful. But make no mistake, the US and most of the world is still run by white people. But because they're not as powerful as before, they think it's a crisis. They want it how it used to be. And that's the same with Jordan Peterson and the people he talks to and they accept his message. You don't have to accept the change in times. You don't have to accept homosexuals or atheists or anyone who's a different gender or from a minority. That it's okay to reject this because some stupid, I'm going to get into his really weird arguments about why it's okay to draw on history and say it was better the way we used to have it, like maybe even 1,000 years ago. So I'm going to go on and read the rest of the article. So let's get into the craziest part of the whole article, his argument about, you know, justifying male dominance and the male hierarchy. So the left, he believes, refuses to admit that men might be in charge because they're better at it. Peterson says, the people who hold that our culture is an oppressive patriarchy, they don't want to admit that the current hierarchy might be predicated on competence, he said. Mr. Peterson illustrates his arguments with copious references to ancient myths, bringing up stories of witches, biblical allegories, and ancient traditions. I ask why these old stories should guide us today. Peterson says, it makes sense that a witch lives in a swamp. Yeah? He says, why? It's a hard one. Right, that's right. You don't know. It's because those things hang together as a very deep level, right? Yeah. And it makes sense that an old king lives in a desiccated tower. But witches don't exist, and they don't live in swamps, I say. Yeah, they do. They do exist. They just don't exist the way you think they exist. They certainly exist. You may say, well, dragons don't exist. It's like, yes, they do. The category predator and the category dragon are the same category. It absolutely exists. It's a superordinate category. It exists absolutely more than anything else. In fact, it really exists. What exists is not obvious, you say. Well, there's no such thing as witches. Yeah, I know what you mean, but that isn't what you think when you go see a movie about them. You can't help but fall into these categories. There's no escape from them. So that is obviously fucking insane. So people are going to tell me I'm missing his point. Is he saying that something similar to witches exist, so witches do exist, or in our mind witches exist, so they are real and stuff, some stupid psychological bullshit. That sounds insane to me, doesn't it? So I think what he's trying to say is witches live in swamps to say men dominate society. It just happens and it exists and we don't explain it, and such shit like that. I can't even understand. It's insane, isn't it? People consider him an intellectual, and he's using dragons and witches to try and justify his argument about male dominance. So let's get on to my final point and reaffirm what I said earlier, is that Jordan Peterson and people like him just tell people what they want to hear. And this is no more evident in the article talking to some of his fans. Jacob Logan, 18, from Allison, Ontario, was first in line for Mr. Peterson's talk on Thursday, May 3rd, at the Queen Elizabeth Theatre. He had arrived 12 hours early wearing a shirt with lobsters stacked upon each other. He also had 100 name tags to hand out, which he scrawled the name Bucko. It's a nickname Mr. Peterson sometimes uses for his fans. Jacob Logan says, "Whenever I listen to him, it's like he's telling me something I already knew. Learning is remembering." And this is what I was saying. This guy is prejudiced, or he doesn't like a certain group. And with Jordan Peterson telling him it's okay to feel like that, it's like, you're telling me what I want to be. You're telling me it's okay how I am. I don't have to change with the times. And that's my whole point. Again, for someone who's talking about personal accountability, this guy here. And do you think someone who queues up 12 hours to go to Jordan Peterson really has his shit together? Do you think he has critical thinking? No, he's just a sheep. And Jordan Peterson says, like, it's shepherd, you know, he's a shepherd, misses his flock. He's like, it's okay to be how you are. It's okay to not really care about feminism. It's okay not to care about gender equality. It's okay to not care about, you know, black rights and shit. Not all of these things, but obviously, like, it's okay to be how you are, basically. So here's another one. Inside among the crowd was Sue Bone, 66, a retired flight attendant from Halifax. Mrs. Bone loved her flight attendant job until she began to find it dehumanising and corporate. Her friend told her the airlines were now run by angry gay queens, she says. She found Mr. Peterson. She feels he understands the danger of these strange new social forces. He's waking us up in the West. So isn't that insane? She quit her job and then her friend says, yeah, it's a shitty job because gay queens are running the airline industries. How many gay CEOs do you know of companies? I think I can name one off the top of my head, Tim Cook. That is literally it. How many gay CEOs do you think run airlines? Not many, I can assure you. So he makes people's prejudice, he makes them feel like it's okay. You know, these social forces, the gays, the transgenders, the SJWs, the feminists, the leftists, the Marxists, they've all combined and they want to put Marxism on the United States. They've infiltrated everywhere. It's the Red Scare again. But instead of using the civil rights movement, as the Red Scare people used to say, they're using all these other movements. Antifa are coming. They're way worse than Nazi marches and everything. See, this is what I was saying. It reaffirms people's prejudice and makes them feel okay about it. So they throw money at him. It's the perfect way to make money. You see Dave Rubin, Paul Joseph Watson, all these people are making loads of money because they just tell people what they want to hear. In case of Dave Rubin, he brings on people like Jordan Peterson, Tommy Robinson, people like that who say this shit, and people like, I don't have to change. I can just feel prejudice. I can feel all these beliefs because people like this tell me it's okay. So one more. Andrew McVicker, 45, a waiter, says it was good to hear someone finally talk about how hierarchies were okay. He says current politics are pushing for everyone to be the same, promoting women and minorities into unearned positions. It's forced diversity, it's saying you must have X% of ABC, he says. How about look at yourself? This guy here is saying like, oh, I don't want like a percentage, you know, you must hire this percentage of black people and everything like that. But he's also saying like, it's unearned. Why do white people earn any of this? Do you know what I mean? A black person getting in the same job as a white person traditionally have to work so much harder because there is still racial prejudice, especially in America. This whole thing hinges on white straight people being so afraid that their power is diminishing, even a tiny bit, right? Who's in charge of America? Donald Trump, Mike Pence. What are they? Straight white old guys who are Christians. Who's in charge of most of the government? Exactly the same type of people as them. Who's in charge of most of the UK? Same type of people as them. Who's in charge of most of the European countries? Straight white Christians. Who's in charge of like the Arab world? Straight Arabs, you know, but they might be Muslim, but they share a lot of the conservative beliefs and it's definitely the views between women. And there is a great Twitter account. It's called Jordan Peterson or Radical Islamic Cleric. And what it does is put Jordan Peterson quotes on pictures of Islamic clerics, and it is essentially no different at all. It is exactly the same in most cases. And that's where these people align. They get so scared of minorities and everything. You'd make great allies of you know, radical Muslims. You have a lot of the same arguments, like don't challenge the male hierarchy, women, you should submit to men. I don't understand how they don't see it. They're so scared of Muslims. They might be your best friends, radical Muslims. So I'm sick of people calling this guy an intellectual and everything. People get annoyed when people say this, but I do think he's a stupid person, smart person. Because I look at him and he's dressed up in fancy words, he's a university professor, but his argument lacked any substance. And people are going to tell me in this video, I know they are, they're going to say, you've missed the whole point about the witches, you missed the whole point about everything like this. Why can't we just forget these differences? In my view, like, it holds us back. And he's religious as well, and I think that comes to the heart of it as well. Religious, straight, white, hates women or has a grudge against women in some capacity because it's not normal the way he views women, and he's afraid that the Marxist union of Antifa, transgender rights activists, gay rights activists, feminists, all coming together, infiltrating everywhere, and we're going to make, put you in gulags if you don't obey our gender pronouns. That's his fear. Irrational fear. And what country does he operate in? The US. What country is he from? Canada. And he's so scared of things like this. And it's crazy because it's such like a minority issue. Like I said, who dominates these countries? White, straight Christians. And he's like fearing for his life. The Marxists are coming. So he's clearly a bit unhinged, and his supporters, they're just looking for someone to tell them it's okay how they are. It's okay that you're a loser. It's okay women don't like you. It's not your fault. It's women's fault. We should have enforced monogamy where you get partnered with someone. Supervision from the government. And if you're an incel, it's okay. It's not your fault. It's okay to be an incel. Women always go for the most attractive, the most popular and everything. And while that is true in some instances, popularity is attractive. Being physically in shape is attractive. Deep down, even if you're a Jordan Peterson fan, that isn't true. Because like I said, think about your parents, think about your grandparents, think about your aunties, uncles, think about your friends. Think about the girls they are with, and think about, do girls only go for people like Jordan Peterson thinks they do? So this is the whole culture of these intellectuals who aren't really intellectuals. They just tell people what they want to hear and get a nice fat paycheck for it. And they make so much money off it. You don't get money for being a liberal on YouTube. Compare Jimmy Dore or Sam Cedar to Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson. And I think a lot of it does come down to religion, in my opinion, because and Jordan Peterson's whole thing is sort of like a religious offshoot. You think about like Far Cry 5, that's what it sort of reminds me of. One of the brothers called John in it, who has this cult about saying yes to everything and shit. This is what it reminds me of. It's just like telling people it's okay, don't have to accept change. But these are the sort of people who back in the day would say the same about civil rights. If Jordan Peterson was around in the 50s and 60s, you reckon he'd be for segregation, wouldn't you? You reckon he'd be against equal pay for women? Let's be real, he would have been, because it messes with the hierarchy of men. And these are the people we should just leave in the past. We shouldn't look to these people for inspiration. And if you are a supporter for his other shit about personal accountability, what in his statements to the New York Times is he talking about personal accountability, saying how it's not your fault? He's not, and he's just paranoid about Marxists and leftists, and he basically delusional. And he got famous because of the culture at the moment. Like, in America, the reason they can't accept this change is because it's so fundamentally Christian and backwards. And if you consider yourself a smart person and you're a Jordan Peterson fan, really rethink it. Because I say, have critical thinking. To dissect his argument and see what he's really about. Because it's not intellectual. He comes across as one. He's very good at speaking. He's a university professor. Does that mean anything a university professor says is right just because he's a university professor? I could do a PhD and then become a university professor. I'm not too far away from one. And I'm sure a lot of you in the comments would tell me, you wouldn't believe everything I said. But that's the same as Jordan Peterson. I could be a next Jordan Peterson of a different variety. I'm not too far away from it. 4 more years, I just do my PhD after my master's. Then I can become a university professor. So anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. What do you think is appealing about people like this? Do you think they actually have any value? Or they're just indicative of our stupidity as a society? Because that's what I think it is. It shows how stupid we are as a human race. A lot of things do in general, how much of the population of this earth are really religious and everything. But there's other things like this. Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, Dave Rubin being prominent, I think is a massive indictment about how stupid we are in the West. Because it requires no critical thinking. It just requires you to consume it all and feel okay about yourself. You've got to sometimes look at yourself and be like, where do I need to change? What do I need to learn more about? Not be like, oh, I'm a bigot and I'll just stay a bigot because Jordan Peterson tells me it's fine. So if you're on Twitter, you can find me at @TheCavernacle. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.